So we are here today with Darren Murph, the head of remote for GitLab. Darren, I am so thrilled to be talking to you today because I have 100 million questions for you. But before we start, why don't you just tell everyone who's viewing a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks for having me. Thanks all for checking this out. So I'm Darren. I've worked remotely my entire career across the spectrum of remote. I have worked in co-located spaces, mostly in hybrid remote spaces, and now recently at GitLab, an all-remote company with over 1,300 people in more than 65 countries with no company-owned offices. I love to travel. I love to explore different cultures. So remote was a natural fit for me. And I live in a relatively rural part of the world in North Carolina. And so it's kind of remote or bust if I want to be in the marketing, comms, and technology space. And so what I've been doing for the past 15 years is now suddenly relevant to tens of millions of people. And it has been quite the whirlwind.
I'm sure. So I would like to start maybe with talking a little bit about this because you mentioned to me earlier that there's a big difference between what we're experiencing right now, which I think you refer to as crisis-induced work from home, and really remote working. So let's start there.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. As you can see, this jet right here, outside of one amazing trip to Yellowstone last month, that's as close as I've come to a jet in 7 months. And so I like to say I have not worked remotely for 7 months. I've been forced to work from home. Thankfully, I optimized my home for remote work before all of this started. So I do have a nice home office. I have fiber to the home. I'm well set up. Not many people are as advantaged as this. It's really important to remember that because if this is your first experience with extended time outside of the office, you're probably not in love with it. But you got to remember, proper work, remote work enables you to go to your favorite coffee shop or co-working space or have dinner with other people. Go to the grocery store without a mask. There's a lot of global things happening right now that have nothing to do with remote work. But because they're happening at the same time as most people are experiencing remote work for the first time, they're getting those conflated. And it's very tough to decouple them. So what I'm trying to do is convey to people what is magical about remote work and what you can look forward to once travel restrictions are lifted and we're on the other side of this.
That makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned, now people are suddenly interested. And I've seen so much about GitLab and about the experience. One of the things I've really admired about the company is how transparent and open you are with your practices. And so for companies that are having to just like jump into this and try and make the experience as good as they can, you've provided a ton of resources to be able to do that. Which would you highlight as the go-tos?
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. At GitLab, we have a work saying that we try to answer everything with a link, and we literally mean it. If someone asks you a question at GitLab and you can't go find a link to answer it in the company handbook, we of course find the answer, but then we immediately document it so that if anyone else has this question going forward, they won't have to tap someone on the virtual shoulder. They can simply go find it themselves. So 2 things I would recommend. First off, search for Coursera and GitLab. We just launched how to manage a remote team curriculum on Coursera. It's totally free to take. There is a paid certificate at the end if you want that. But GitLab is an open core company. We open source all of our knowledge around remote work. And so that includes our course with Coursera. So dive into that. You can take it at your own pace. It is structured for 5 weeks, but I actually had someone tell me they binged it over a weekend. And so if you're binging school, it must be pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. That's pretty good feedback. And then the other thing is to Google GitLab Remote Work Emergency Plan. Once all of this happened, I wrote an emergency plan with the top 5 things that you should do as a leader. And if you are an individual contributor, there's a link within that guide of where to start if you are on the other side of this and you need to help support management get you through it.
Perfect. Thank you. I have found those resources to be very helpful and so many more than that too. So we'll leave it at that for now. One of the things that I did want to ask you about is culture. And what do you do to help maintain a culture during this time? What does culture look like for remote work?
So first off, culture looks very different right now, even for very intentional remote companies that have a very well-oiled workflow and culture. It looks a lot different. It's a lot less about company rah-rah and more about simply supporting each other. At GitLab, we have a team-wide Slack, we have a parenting channel, and there are lots of parents in there that are commiserating together. They're trying to figure out virtual learning together and redistributing work amongst other people on their teams. It's kind of a lot of just getting really real with each other right now. But on the other side of that, being there for each other is going to strengthen and embolden culture, even if it doesn't feel like a lot to celebrate or rally around right now. The other thing I want to mention is that in an intentional remote setting, you don't usually rely on the company as much to fill the social quota of individuals. And what I mean by that is a lot of people feel like they're missing going out to lunch or dinner or after work drinks with their colleagues because that's where they filled their social quota. And you can only do so many virtual happy hours before they just kind of lose their magic. So what we do at GitLab is we empower people to be very efficient and effective at work and leave work as soon as possible, and then go be hands and feet in their communities. They have intentionally chosen to live somewhere in the world, and they've done that for a reason, because that community matters to them. So they will go do things in their community. They'll take pictures, they'll gather stories, videos, and then they'll share that back in our team-wide Slack. And so I see people doing things all over the world. And then when I work with them, there's no more icebreakers about the weather or sports. We can actually talk about things we are actually doing that are very meaningful to each of us. And so this is a paradox, but the more time we spend outside of work, it actually builds deeper work culture because we get to see each other for who we really are. Now, in a pandemic, there's less things that we can do, but you can still put a mask on and go do something. Many teams right now don't have that advantage because they aren't in a spot where all of their workforce can just go pick a place on the map and go optimize their life for living wherever they want to live. Yeah. But I say this about culture to hopefully forecast what it can look like if your company properly supports people all over the world. It is kind of amazing what you can empower your people to pour back into culture if you democratize it a bit and decentralize culture into individuals instead of the core epicenter of a headquarters, for example.
Yeah. And you said something before that really struck me, and you can correct my wording if it doesn't come out quite right, but you talked about how this moment in time is maybe less about how to create a great remote work experience and more about unlocking the imagination of what could be when we're
correct. Yeah. That's really at the core of it. Life has a way of beautifying beginnings and ends, but it's in the middle that we often forget, yet that's where all the character is made. We are very much in the middle of something. So as tough as it is an opportunity to plan for the other side of this. This is an opportunity for companies all over the world to build remote fluency, to rethink about all of their preconceived notions of what people expect out of work or how much they should contribute to the culture versus empowering people to bring that culture that makes them to work. It's an amazing reshuffling of everything we thought about work. And using your imagination to think, what could life look like if I did not have to be within a commutable distance to an office? What could life look like if I optimize my life for living, to be near elders that matter to me, to be near a school district that I'm longing to get my child into, maybe optimize it for better air quality or access to hiking trails, anything. The thing about remote is it's the world's most inclusive perk because everyone can use it in a way that is unique to them, in a very different way, in a way that impacts them, but everyone can enjoy it all the same. So I think we're on the precipice of companies. They have a big decision to make. Are they going to simply allow remote work or are they going to support remote work? And there's a big difference between being allowed to do something and being supported in something. And it's going to be a big sea change for leaders in making that shift. I do think it will be a big litmus test for where people want to work, depending on how many companies go one way versus the other.
I had one final question for you, which really came to me from an article that I read in The Atlantic, and they were talking about the impact of the current work from home culture that we're experiencing and what that might create for the challenges it might create for the youngest generation of our employees, not being able to learn from people who've been working for a period of time. And I'd like your thoughts on that.
Yeah, this is a great question. I'll give you two anecdotes here. The first is we just graduated a class of interns at GitLab. And when we initially set this up, we thought that they would have a week in person somewhere in the globe as a fast boot. And then we would be all remote for most of the internship, and then an exit week where we get everyone together again. So then COVID happened and serves us right. We're going to have to do the whole thing all remote. We're an all remote company. We're going to have to do the whole internship all remote. But here's the interesting thing. For the interns that joined, so much of our work and what we've done over the years has been written down and documented in the company handbook, that when you know you're not going to have the in-person crutch, you simply dig into what is already written. And so our interns showed up essentially saying, I feel like I've already worked here for half a year because I've just spent the past week reading and reading and reading and learning from the generation that came before me. And now, to a large degree, I understand the culture, I understand the values, I kind of understand the ebbs and flows of working here, but I haven't even started working here yet. And that goes to show if you invest heavily in documentation and you really buy into the written culture, these are the types of efficiencies that you will get over time. Knowledge can be scaled if you put in the effort and energy to write things down now. And it really reshapes your time scale. Writing things down feels very inefficient if your time scale is 1 hour. But if your time scale is a year or 2 or 3 or a decade, then it's a no-brainer to write something down because you'll save someone the hassle of asking you for something over many, many years. So that's one anecdote of how a company can set the next generation up for success. Writing down what you know, help them learn. To some degree, the employer becomes another educational institution where you write things down so that they can read or they can watch videos or they can learn in different mediums. But instead of just helping them wander around the building, you're actually pointing them at knowledge, things that really matter to them. So that's one anecdote. The other thing is in-person engagement matters a lot. And I've been a little concerned by how many leaders are coming to me with questions of how do we onboard people in a completely no-touch environment? How do we foster the next generation of great remote leaders without ever seeing them in person? And my response to that is, that's the wrong solve. We will see each other again. And even at GitLab, an entirely remote organization, we get our entire team together once a year for an annual summit. It's mostly just bonding. We do a little bit of work, but not much. We get smaller teams together for semi-annual offsites. We get our sales team together for in-person events that we support. We try to bring as many people together as possible. We even offer a stipend for people that happen to live relatively close to each other to get together for ad hoc holiday gatherings. We have a visiting grant. We will partially subsidize travel if you cross oceans and go visit someone in another country. We even had someone from North Dakota get married in New York City, and I think people from 5 different countries flew into it. I mean, that's pretty amazing. So nice. A long way of saying how you do it is you strategically deploy travel to make sure the next generation has opportunities to meet people in person. Mm-hmm. So shifting to remote is not the end of in-person. It is simply the beginning of the next wave of flexibility. We are finally leveraging the internet and technology to embrace the flexibility and the democratization of remote work that should have happened a decade ago. But COVID, I think, has accelerated it by about a decade, so maybe we're now just catching up. In-person will always matter. I'm a traveler at heart. Although I live and work in North Carolina, I try to get out and travel a lot. I usually travel about 100,000 miles a year, meeting people from inside the company, from other walks of life. That has to resume. And it will feel a lot better when travel restrictions are lifted and we can do that. It will allow people to live and work where they want to be, but they won't do it at the expense of getting to spend time with people who can be their mentors and help them progress in their career.
Yeah, thank you for that, because I think that might be a misconception of people as they're looking at this situation and also projecting what the future might look like. And I think you've given us a lot to think about. Thank you so much for talking to me today and sharing all of your knowledge.
Happy to do it, Sarah. And be sure to check out allremote.info if you want a deep dive into the GitLab handbook. Bring a very tall cup of coffee and spend a lot of time in there.
It's binge-worthy.
Binge-worthy, exactly. That's the goal.